Hi, everyone. My name is Denise Myrick. I'm a product manager from the Oracle Spatial and Graph team. We're here today with Giant and Hans for our April 2024 Ask Tom session. We're going to go over the highlights from the Data and Analytics Summit, Analytics and Data Summit 2024, which happened just a few weeks ago. Hans, if you want to go to the next slide.
Yep.
Thank you. Before we get started, I just want to highlight that you can see all of our previous Ask Tom sessions by going to this spatial recordings link that I dropped into the chat, and you can see any of the old recordings that you haven't seen. And if you click around this webpage, you can sign up for reminders of our future lessons or future chats. Next slide.
Yep. I think with that, we can just get started. This time we do have a safe harbor statement because we have at least one small section which has forward-looking information. So for formal reasons, we'll have that safe harbor statement here just so that everybody is aware. But really 99% of what Jay and I will be talking about today are referring to things which are available in production today. Key topic, thanks a lot, Denise, for today is the Analytics and Data Summit 2024, which happened April 9th through 11th in California. For those of you who are not so familiar with the event, it's actually not an Oracle conference. It is a conference which is organized by the Oracle user community. And in particular, it's organized by that part of the Oracle user community that focuses on analytics and anything like big data, data warehousing, lake housing, spatial and graph, AI, ML, all of these topics are the focus topics of the analytics and data user community. It is an event where we, as the Spatial and Graph team, have joined forces with what used to be the BOR Summit many years ago. So it's been happening pretty much on an annual basis, except during the pandemic. Since the pandemic, it has not quite reached the size it had before yet. So it's got a kind of more intimate setting, lots of opportunity for interactions. And I think that is also what quite a few folks find great about it. It is, as a user community thing, it is driven by volunteers. So there's a bunch of experts, including the likes of Dan Flamis and Abby Giles Haig and Roger Cressy and Wayne van Sloos and a whole range of others who, by the way, deserve a big thank you for the effort they're putting into this, who are putting together this event. And it is not only on the spatial technologies, although today in our Spatial Ask Tom session, obviously we'll be focusing on the spatial aspects of the event. It is an event which has a graph track, also data lakehouse track, an AI and ML track. It's got an analytics or analytics plus track, as they tend to call it. So it is an event with a scope that goes beyond the spatial technologies. And typically what you find at the conference is practitioners, right, end users, but also Oracle aces. For us, like Jay and Denise, myself, as Oracle PMs in the respective domains, we have a certain representation. So there's a bunch of folks there. And the main reason why the event is actually pretty popular is threefold. One, folks use it for sort of learning, right? What's new and how do others use the Oracle technologies? Then they use it for networking, and it's always a good opportunity, and also for us, sort of on the product management side, to exchange with the vendor. What you can see on this slide here is first of all, the landing page, right? www.andouc.org. That's the user group altogether, and there is a dedicated landing page for the summit itself. But what is probably more interesting and more relevant to you is the A&D Summit 2024.sessionize.com link, which leads you to the slide decks. So at least to the degree that folks have uploaded the presentation materials, you can find, I would say, a large portion of the content which was presented on that website. Um, a quick shout out to the A&D Oracle user community at this point. Beyond the landing page, you can also um, find the possibility to interact with folks. There is a Slack workspace, which, by the way, also has a dedicated spatial channel. So if you want to interact with us, for example, that's an opportunity. It's gone a bit quiet, but you can sign up using the bit.ly link, which we have here. And there is a regular newsletter so that you do not miss the webcasts, which the ANDOUC folks organize every 2 weeks, pretty much. So you may want to sign up for that. That was my quick intro to the event as such, and to give you a bit of a feeling for what the agenda looks like, right? This is sort of the general structure. You can see lots of lots of opportunity for networking, I should say. And then there's 3 tracks you can see here. There's the spatial track, there's the data lakehouse and analytics plus track, there's the AI and ML track. And then over the course of the 3 days, we had 3 keynotes, one on the future of data, which Maria Colgan presented. That, of course, had some spatial aspects to it. Then there was a very nice and entertaining one by Jim Chaplinsky on Chat GPT, the bottom line of which was that human intelligence will still continue to be essential going forward. And as you can see here on the screenshot, the Oracle Analytics roadmap by Gabby Rubin. So one of these sort of product roadmap sessions, which are typically popular with the community and which are always very informative. Right. So that hopefully gives you a bit of an idea and what our intention is. When I say our, that's Denise's and Jayen's and mine for today's session, is to give you a bit of the gist of the spatial track, going over the different customer sessions, partner sessions, the Oracle sessions, and point you to where to find more information. For some technical aspects, I have included a few sort of explainer slides to give you more background. And if you have any questions, if you have any comments, whatever, we're happy to turn this into an interactive session. Do please use the Q&A box to ask questions, and we'll try to answer them as we go along. Right, and with that, unless I have forgotten anything, Jayant, with that, I think we can
I
get
think
started, can we?
covered everything, just 2 small differences this year. I mean, it's right, the attendance is trending up. The interesting thing this year was there was quite a few customers, so end users. But also interesting was the participation by students. There were quite a few grad students, some from Stanford, some from San Jose State, who attended. So that was a lot of fun interacting with the students because, at the sessions, they're the ones who ask all the challenging questions. So, yeah.
Sure. Yep. Very, very, very good point. Excellent. Right. Anything else before we dive into the actual content? Again, if there's anything you would like to ask as we go along, put things into the Q&A box. Don't please use the chat because that makes it a bit hard for us to keep track of things. Do use the Q&A.
Yeah, so on that is we will find out about the newsletter. There's a note there saying that wherever the newsletter was hosted, that has been sunsetted. We'll clarify that. And the second is the link to the slides that's in the chat, but Denise, if you can post it in response to that question.
Absolutely.
Okay, apologies. I did not realize that the A&D OUC newsletter is not being broadcast that way
No,
any
I
longer.
don't know. We have to check that. I don't know. It's just that.
Yeah, not at least not through that channel. Anyway, all right, good. We'll try to find out. Thanks for the hint, Hashimi. That was useful. So I think with that we can get started. The sort of in the little agenda screenshot that you just saw, the first session was a partner session actually by a partner called ITIS, who were presenting on transportation safety or their transportation safety management system. Jane, can you give us a little bit of an idea of who ITIS are and what kind of business problem they are addressing?
Sure. So they're a geospatial, they're a system integrator. They specialize in solutions in the transportation industry. They have a lot of experience, but their particular focus is geospatial analytics for transportation. So their main product is the safety portal, and it's unique. What it does actually is implement something known as the Highway Safety Manual. So the National Highways Authority actually has a set of models. It tells you exactly how you're supposed to do the models, how you're supposed to do safety analysis, and including the prediction models. So when a DOT or a state or local Department of Transportation wants to make any decisions on the data that they collect, all the modeling that is done has to conform to what's laid out in the HSM, the Highway Safety Manual. And that's what this portal implements. So that way they have something which is authorized and audited, right? They know why something happened. They can account for why a decision was made and how it was done. So the primary thing here with ITIS is they have experience, as we said, in GIS overall, geospatial, with all the products that you can name and that you may want to use. But what they find useful for them when delivering a solution is on the Oracle platform, it is a lot cheaper for them to deliver it. And second, they've got people who, a lot of customers obviously using Oracle, but the key thing is that they've got people who know SQL, who know PL SQL, who know the Python and Java, and it becomes very easy to deliver a solution on a single platform rather than having multiple moving parts in keeping track of all those interfaces. So that was the thing. What was it that they were presenting here was how they implemented the HSM on the Oracle platform, but what are the key benefits that they got in the process, the end user. So the question here is, a state, a DOT like Wyoming, for example, or Nevada, or they took some examples from Hawaii also, is how do they decide where and when to invest their resources in improving transportation safety? So it's all about two things. Essentially, it's not just the condition of the roadways, it's the location and the particular configuration that makes a big difference. Let's take one or two simple examples. For example, at least Denise would know, occasionally driving up from Boston or driving back to Boston in the afternoon or early morning, there are spots where the sun shines directly in your eyes, right? That has an effect. And they took examples in Wyoming where it's the incline, the nature of the intersections, the banking in the road on a steep curve, all of these things, and the effect of speed, weather in those things, right? They have to take all of this into account. So why did that matter? Number one, they have to integrate data from multiple sources. And number two, what they discovered when using this safety portal, or rather when their customers, the DOTs, different users in a DOT wanted to use it, they found it was interesting. They all start actually with this map view that you see in the bottom. That's where they start. And they want to see all of the data because they want to visualize a trend, and then they start investigating. So that was interesting. And so what is it in the platform that made that possible and interactive and useful? And that was something called vector tiles, which is a way of streaming lots of data along with all of its attributes or properties, and then be able to interact with it on the client, search, filter, uh, drill up, drill down, etc. Anyway, Hans, back to you.
Yeah, no, brilliant. This is great. Then they use the vector tile map visualization inside of both Apex and Spatial Studio, if I remember
Right,
well, right?
that's right.
Okay, cool stuff. Because the nice thing about this presentation was also that they had a couple of technical details explaining how they implemented things. And anybody who wants to have a look at how they worked with vector tiles, how they used the Oracle REST data services in conjunction with their platform, how they used Apex to visualize things and so on. They have a bunch of sample code snippets, and if you're quick, you can take the screenshot of the QR code. But maybe Denise was already fast enough. Yes, she was to include the link in the chat so that you can find it there. So you can find a bunch of things on the technical side under that dedicated link which ITIS provided. And just to expand a little bit on the topic of vector tiles, for those of you who are maybe
Hans, before
working more
you
on the,
go into
yes, go
that
ahead.
slide, I mean, this is an exercise in prompt engineering, I guess. You just prompted me
Yeah, go
and
ahead.
on two things. So yes, they do use an application in it. You can stay on this slide, it's fine. They do use something on Apex, and they do use Spatial Studio. And how does the orgs come into the picture? So they use Spatial Studio for creating content. So they create the analysis and etc. And then they publish that through orgs and consume it in Apex through orgs. So they may do an advanced spatial analysis in Spatial Studio, which gives you access to everything that the database provides in a no-code, low-code manner. And then they consume it once it's published in orgs in Apex. So that was one thing. The other thing is, and I think we are not going to get into it, so I just address it, talk about it right now. What they point out over here on this slide is the fact that they're implementing models, predictive models. And that was the other benefit of the Oracle platform. They used a whole bunch of things from the data science and from OCI in addition to spatial when they were doing their analytics and making that available. An
Yeah.
example is like in Hawaii, they want to make it a lot more efficient to collect all the crash reports and automate that process. So they're using a lot of the AI vision techniques to automate the extraction of data from incident reports.
Okay, great. Yeah, that was very helpful to expand on that. Thanks a ton, Jay, and because both the use case of using Spatial Studio more like a developer tool rather than for analytics
Right.
purposes is, I think, a use case which we've been talking about quite a bit, but which not everybody, I think, in the audience is aware of. So it's great that you emphasize that. And yes, the trend to use things in conjunction with like Python and so on. We'll come back to that in a second in a different context, but that is also, of course, something which becomes so easy with the cloud. The little explainer I wanted to briefly insert here, which is sort of going beyond what ITIS talked about in their presentation, is for those of you in the audience who are maybe not so familiar with vector tiles as a topic, to just explain very briefly what this is about, right? If you're more on the database side, maybe you haven't seen that a whole lot. It is different from the provisioning of tiles which we had in the past, which were essentially raster tiles generated on the server. In that you generate vectors, but you generate them in tiles, and the great advantage of this is you can, first of all, combine data, including the attributes, with style data, and then and then transport that information to the client in a very efficient manner. And the Mapbox guys who developed this have essentially made it open source or open standard, so that there's tons of clients really using this kind of approach. Benefits are pretty simple, right? You can, because you have access to the vector data and the style information, you essentially have everything in your client. You can style things dynamically as you go along without having to go back to the server. It is, as I said, small, compact, pretty fast, so really efficient. Plus, it's tiled, so you can do caching as well. Third advantage is it allows you to do smooth interactions because you have all the data in the client. You can, tilt things or re-render things if you need them. All of that is possible. Plus, because you have the features, including their properties, in your browser, you can do all sorts of query and analysis without having to go back to the server. And as I said, it is open standard, and we're making use of it in our own technologies, like in Spatial Studio, in the map visualization component. But there's tons of other mapping clients using vector tiles these days. We are in the process of expanding our support for vector tiles, so stay tuned for announcements coming up in the not too distant future. Right. I think we've been taking a lot more time on this topic than I thought we would, so I think we should go move on to the next session in the spatial track, which was a customer session, in this case, Canadian National Rail, CN. So again, from the transportation domain, Jane, can you tell us a little bit about what Patrice and Yves talked about?
Sure. So first, Canadian Rail, they manage about 32,000 kilometers of rail, and they focused on cargo and freight. But what they talked about was how do they, well, that's a lovely picture there. That is what they talked about, which is how do they transport loads of an odd size, in this case, a wind turbine, right? The blades for a wind turbine that crosses over 5 or 6 rail cars, or of a odd height or weight, so difference in size, right? And why is this important? Well, in this particular case, there's a lot of push in, at least in Canada, for green energy, right? Putting up wind farms, putting up solar and other things. And the issue was that earlier, they didn't know whether or not they could actually transport this from one location to another, right? From where it's manufactured to where it has to be used. They had some process which was a expensive manual survey of a proposed route. And what they presented here was how they moved away from that and essentially created a spatial digital twin. So they have a digital twin of their network. So what does that mean? It's not just a highly precise map of the tracks and things like that. It's of everything which is around it. Bridges, tunnels, obstructions, vegetation, railway crossings, and also things such as, on a curve, the track is going to bank a little. So what is the angle at which that happens? Why does that matter? If it's a tall and a heavy load, they have had occasions where things have tipped over, right? So they want to simulate that. They essentially simulate, number one, can we carry this load? Will it hit any obstruction or not? Second is, how do you have to adjust the speed of the train at different locations so that some disaster doesn't happen? But more importantly, what happens if there's different weather conditions? What happens if the track is wet? What happens if it's windy? Is this load going to swing a little bit in or out on a turn, and be able to identify where are the places where they have to be extra careful. A, can they take this load? B, where do they have to be careful? And the third is, more importantly, how do we route it? What, if there is an obstruction in one place, right, and where you've got multiple tracks, maybe you take it on some thing which is not normally meant for carrying freight, but is a siding of some kind, but will help you, if you use that temporarily, will help you carry this load and actually deliver the cargo. Well, that's what they want to enable.
Right. And here, if you look at that little picture here, that looks easy, right? It's all you can see that the train with the blades is extremely long, but here we've got a long straight stretch. That's easy, but the tricky parts are all the obstacles, the tunnels, the bridges, the what have you. So yes, sorry to interrupt, Jane. You were not done yet, were you?
No, I was going to say, while they're showing this over here, in reality, very often, where they're putting up these wind farms, you're going to have to cross things like the Rockies, right? And the Rocky Mountains. And it's very important that they understand exactly what's going to happen in those tunnels or in the bridges, on the bridges.
Right. Yes. And for anybody who would like to see a little more of this, this is actually a screenshot from a video which they have produced for social media. So Denise has put the link to that video into the chat. I find that pretty impressive what they have done in terms of logistics, and then sort of the automated route planning, making sure that they know about all their whatever it was, 120,000 obstructions or so, which they have on their network, in order to make sure that things are getting safely from A to B. I don't know if you've been following the Analytics and Data Summits a little bit over the years, but we've had a number of railway customers at the conference, whether it was CSX, for example, or Austrian Rail or others. And we have a really significant number of customers in that domain globally, over here in Europe in particular. And here's just one thing which they were referring to also in the presentation, which we also used or saw in other presentations during the summit, which is one of the reasons why we are so popular in this domain, besides the usual, right, database scalability and security and things. We had support for what is known as dynamic segmentation or linear referencing coordinate systems pretty early on. And in case you are working with any kind of linear structure, you may want to take a look whether that can help you as well, because you can represent your geometries not only as like a linear geometry, as you can see on this slide here, but you could also add measures. And then Oracle Spatial would help you to, for example, interpolate the point in between, or you could clip things or split things and so on, without having to do the computation all manually. And that allows you to essentially store, like in the railway example, store the track just once, and then have lots of additional tables which refer to this one track. And then just by using the measure and potentially an offset to the left or to the right, can represent all kinds of information, whether they be point information, like where's the signal, right? It's 500 meters down the track and then 5 meters to the right or something, or stretches off rail with whatever speed limits or track conditions and things. But anyway, that was just a little add-on to the example of ITIS. And in the interest of time, I think we should move on to the next customer session, which Jim Chaprinsky from Zero Defect Computing presented, where he was talking about, again, something which had to do with linear referencing on spatial temporal analysis. Now that sounds pretty sophisticated, Jane. What did Jim present on?
Well, first is, for those who don't know Jim or haven't attended one of his sessions or heard him speak, they really should. You should seek him out. He should rename his company from Zero Defect Computing to Zero Defect Storytelling. He's just amazing. He's so engaging. Well, what he was talking about here was he just bought an EV, he's taking advantage of the incentives that are being offered right now for electric vehicles. So he was talking about that experience, and then it made him think about as an EV user, and he's looking at all these charging stations, and he goes into some charging stations, and he had his various experiences. He talks about his experience at these different charging stations, and what was fascinating about this particular session is we happened to have someone from Tesla in the room, and they had a lot of interesting back and forth. One on his choice of EV, but the other on his experience at charging stations. So that was fascinating. Well, what he was talking about is he goes into these charging stations and he notices a few things. One is um, you can drive right up in a few places, and you plug in, only to discover that it's not working. On other occasions, you go there and it's all in use, right? And so all of these little things. So he's trying to figure out, well, if I was looking after these stations, I'd want to know. I have all of these cameras. I've got all of this infrastructure around to know exactly who's coming in, when, where, and I should be able to figure out just based on the movement of these vehicles as to A, do I need more stations, more charging stations, and of what type, what types of vehicles are coming in there, and B, whether or not they're all functional. Because that's the other thing. Most of these places are all automated. There's nobody there, and you just go, you use it, and everything is automated. So that's what his problem. He figured. Now, how would I use the technologies that I'm familiar with, in this case, Oracle, Spatial, Apex, etc., in order to do that? And that's what he was demonstrating. He did in this case, it was based on a bit of public data and some synthetic data that he created based on that. But it's essentially showing how you can use the infrastructure, in this particular case, the tracking server, the tracking server package that's part of Oracle Spatial, to find out when did the vehicle enter a particular area, the area that is where the charging stations are, how long did it stay there, and when did it exit, and how many just simply passed by, etc. So why does that matter? If it entered and stayed for a particular time at a particular charging station, it was charging. If it entered, drove around, went to something, and then left immediately, that station probably is not working, or does not support that vehicle type, right? If it is meant only for Teslas, or the adapter wasn't available, whatever it might be. So all of these things are the conclusions you can draw, and then as someone who's in charge of that, you can figure out, do we need some maintenance? Do we need to add more stations of a different type? Or what about if well, he added a few more things, but I'll stop there for now.
Okay, great. Okay. I agree with you about Jim being an excellent storyteller and just a great presenter. And if you're over here in Europe, you will also sometimes see him at Oracle User Group events. Over here, he was in Norway last week. I think the next thing he does is Make IT in Slovenia in May. So he is over here from time to time. If you have a chance, go and see him. I can really recommend that. Jayan briefly mentioned the tracking server. I think in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into any kind of level of detail on this. We actually do have a dedicated session on spatial temporal analysis, also on the Ask Tom series. But if you go to Jim Chaprinsky's slide deck, you can already take all the important information from that. Just to let you know, if you do any kind of tracking and tracing on streaming data, we do have an infrastructure as part of Oracle Spatial that is ready for you to use, which you can use to address these types of event-driven architectures. And with that, let me move on to the next session, which was actually also very interesting in that it addressed a pretty common issue, which is where to find suitable spatial data. So what Tim and Dan Vlamis from Huron Consulting presented on was location analytics, specifically looking at where do they find appropriate, for example, open data. So, Jane, what are some of the main takeaways from that talk?
So this particular talk it wasn't just about where to find open data. They talked about what was the business problem they were trying to solve and why they needed to find these data sources and this data. So the problem is they were doing a project for Bowie State, which is in the DC metro area. And what they wanted to understand is, what is their student enrollment? Where do they come from? How do they increase enrollment? What is the background of the students so that they can understand whether or not, before they come in, how do they tailor the onboarding process so that the students are more likely to be successful at that time in college? So this is an HBCU, historically Black university. And a lot of their students come from, they have various challenges. And what they want to do is increase not just their enrollment, but the success rate for the students. Their focus is on really making sure that the students are successful. So what they wanted to analyze is, where these students are coming from, what is their level of preparation, what kind of additional support should we provide them, and where do we go out and recruit other students? So what are the catchment areas and what are the demographics of those catchment areas? And other simple things such as how do the students get to school, and what are their transportation options? So what does that mean? That means they need information on the DC area, the metro bus and train network. They need information on where the high schools are. What is the census demographics of the areas where these students are coming from? And so that's why they needed all of this information. And in the process of acquiring it, they learned a few things. One is that, surprisingly, state and local governments have much better data and are more forthcoming or easier to access. It turns out because in certain cases where they thought they'd be able to get all of this data from federal sources, it actually turned out that you require an API key, and didn't want to do that. It's technically open data, but it still requires an API key for access. So they talked about that, but the other very interesting thing about this is you're showing a map here that essentially, you point out that the whole analysis here is inherently visual, right? So when they had this session, one of these rare events happened wherein the screen went blank. It just shorted out. Somebody in the room in the back they didn't actually unplug it, but they were moving equipment in and out, and things went haywire and everything went black. And you talked about Dan being highly experienced and Tim. They just went on with the presentation, an engaging, useful presentation with no visuals on something that's inherently visual. So that was amazing. But anyway, I hope I covered the use case, which is how to increase enrollment and how to increase the success rate and the data that you need in order to help you with some of that analysis and where to get it. That's what it was about.
Right, good stuff. And they used a Spatial Studio for all the visualization and so on. Great stuff. Okay, and yeah, as you just said, they are also great and very experienced presenters. Now, the next session in the spatial track was one which is probably going to address Nasir's question, which we had in the Q&A, which is a session on spatial and artificial intelligence, Jane, which you had prepared. But in order to do it justice, we have decided that it really deserves a dedicated session. So we have tentatively scheduled the next Spatial Office Hour for May 28th, and the topic will be the spatial enhancements in Oracle Machine Learning. So, Nazir, I have to ask you for a little bit of patience. We'll drill down into all the details of this topic of combining spatial analytics and OML in that session. And let me briefly move on to that. That was essentially the presentations in the spatial track. What we also did have was which may also be interesting for you, Nazir, was a hands-on lab. And the hands-on lab is probably also something which you may find interesting, because you can use these things on your own as well. Jane, do you want to explain a little bit about what this was and what you did and how to get the material and so on?
Right. So how to get the material, oracle.com/live labs, search for spatial, and this live lab is available. The good thing about it is that it's something known as green button enabled, which means you don't have to have your own tenancy. You can just run it on the live labs tenancy, where it'll provision the instance and everything that you need, the infrastructure that you need, make it available for an hour and a half, so that you can run through the workshop. So what the workshop is, it shows how to use, obviously, Oracle Spatial, but equally importantly, how to use a popular Python library for spatiotemporal analysis. So finding clusters both in space and time. And the example given here is, transactions are being made. They may be all clustered in a region, but there is a transaction which is, let's say, 100 kilometers away that happened at around the same time on the same physical card, which is odd, right? How can it be in two places at once? So that's what the workshop is about. How to use Python libraries in conjunction with spatial analytics and spatial queries.
Great stuff. I find that very interesting, because and I see that being used out in customer projects more and more, where customers use the compute power of the database to do sort of the heavy lifting and do the main number crunching, and then use fancy advanced spatial algorithms from Python libraries in particular to do sophisticated analytics on top of a pre-aggregated, pre-processed data set and so on. So great stuff. Anybody who wants to try this out on their own, here's the link to the Live Labs workshop. Thanks, Jane. That's great. That was essentially all we had in the spatial track, but the spatial technologies also featured in other tracks, like in the Analytics Plus track. There was a session on advanced analytics with Oracle Analytics Cloud, which Philippe Lyon, the product manager for OAC, or one of the product managers on the OAC team, presented, where he was also highlighting new functionality. Jane, can you explain a little bit about what that was about?
So this was more an overview of all the things that you can do with OAC. But the important point was that a lot of the examples that he talked about actually were about not just viewing things on a map, but actual spatial analysis, drill up, drill down, and things like that. And a new functionality where you can do spatial calculations, distance, area, etc., and the utility of that. But what was important in this is all of the examples that he was talking about, whether their recent success at the Gartner Summit on the Gartner challenge, all of those use cases had a spatial component to it. For example, the Gartner challenge was about sustainable development and poverty, OECD poverty data. They were given that data set and told to do something with it to show off their tools. And it wasn't just pretty maps, it was actual spatial analytics and creating spatial hierarchies and doing a drill up, drill down in those. And this is just an example of taking things such as census demographic data and block groups and doing analysis on it. But he was focused a lot on things such as what their customers are doing with it. For example, one of the customers who was present out front analyzes impact of weather events on the infrastructure, right? The infrastructure on the what they have out front media is when you go and you see these billboards, you know, they most of them are owned by out front media, and a strong wind or a hurricane or earthquake, fire, any hazard can affect their infrastructure and the cost and cost to them. How do they assess that? So those are the examples you were taking. The thing that my takeaway was, it was surprising, well, it shouldn't be surprising, as to how much location information and spatial analysis is just part of any mainstream business process.
Right, very good aspect, and it just shows that this stuff is really ubiquitous. I agree. It's probably a good point in time to check if there are any questions. Does anybody have any questions? If you do have any questions, do please put them into
And then on
the
the
Q&A.
Nasir's
Jayant.
question, I'll follow up. We'll follow up offline too, but just some examples of where people have used in database machine learning and Oracle Spatial. NIH, and they have talked about it a few years ago on this, on some of the analytics that they have done and where they use OML and spatial together. Another example, which is not exactly public, but I can describe what they do. You know, Eversource uses it to, like, they get funding to help people who are, you know, at risk, you know, so they get funding to identify customers who need some assistance, energy assistance, right? Particularly in places like the Northeast, that is a problem, right? If you don't have power or heat in the winter, it's quite a crisis. Same thing in Texas, maybe there's a heat wave. So how do you identify these households? How do you identify these people if they're not seeking assistance themselves? How do you reach out to them? And they use spatial and OML to do that.
Yeah, okay,
They have an
excellent.
academic
Great example.
paper published on it, and we can share that, but they don't have a session at one of our user conferences or an Oracle event, but they do have an academic publication on how exactly that's done. They describe which OML algorithms, what spatial analytics they do on that.
Okay, excellent. So maybe we can follow up offline. I don't know if we have captured the email address, or if you want to reach out to us, we'll be happy to follow up on that. Great. Thanks, Jayant. Looks like there were no immediate additional questions. So there's one more thing which we briefly wanted to touch on, which kind of also wrapped up the conference at the end of day 3, which was the product management panel discussion. So Jay, do you want to say a few words about what the idea was behind this and how in the end that thing actually went?
Well, the idea here, as you said, there are practitioners, developers, customers, partners who are attending. And so the idea was, since there are so many Oracle product managers and Oracle development leads present, give an opportunity for feedback, and people talk about their experiences and what they'd like to see in the various products. While that, and in fact, we probably should use this as an occasion too. If people have feedback, suggestions, please share in the Q&A. But a few interesting things from this. One is obviously a lot of discussion on the impact of AI and Gen AI and what are we doing about it? What is our roadmap, etc. So that was one set of questions. But more practical things, simple things, like some of the customers who were transitioning from a competitor's product onto an Oracle platform were saying, well, you know, when I want to do something with X over there. I just Google it and I can get tons of examples from the community on how to do some little thing with this. Or I can find a 3 or 5 minute video which addresses a specific issue. When I look for the same thing in your products, yes, I get an Ask Tom session, 45-minute video. I'm not sure where to find the answer to my particular question. So that was and then a lot of people picked up on that, and that dominated a lot of the session. And it's a point well taken. Targeted, how do I do X? Or why would I want to do it something else? Right? Or you've got this nice new great algorithm and function. So what? Why and when do I want to use it? So that was it. But really, if people do have feedback, do have suggestions for us, please share. We're very interested in getting your perspective, getting your requirements, and understanding what you'd like to see in the products. And not
Right,
just the
what you'd like
products,
to
but
see in
the
the products,
products.
and also where to find content, right? If there's anybody here in the audience who would like to let us know where they are missing content on Oracle Spatial, or where they typically look for answers, look for sort of smaller things, not the, as Jay was just saying, not the 45-minute Ask Tom session or the well, I mean, the live labs I think have become pretty popular, and they've become a pretty powerful sort of end-to-end Oracle by example type of thing. But for other stuff, whether it be documentation or small algorithms or little use cases and things, where do you look for things? Do you go to whatever YouTube? Do we need to be present on TikTok, for example? Do let us know, right? If there's anything, we'd certainly be interested. Um, and I see there's one question again from Nasir. Any use cases and live labs on how customers are using or can use spatial and or graph with OML on-prem or in hybrid deployments would be great. Okay. Some customers are not yet ready to move their data to public cloud for ML or AI, which means, yes, we need to make sure that things are also available on premises. I think again we'll cover much of that in the spatial and OML session for Graph. Nasir, I hope you're aware we do have a dedicated Ask Tom series, so that we are covering these topics, particularly the Graph and ML stuff. Um, uh, in a dedicated Ask Tom series. Also, among the slide decks on the Analytics and Data Summit website, there are presentations that cover the combination of graphs and OML. In particular, there's one with Meli and Song Park Hong and others who present on sort of the art of the possible. There are materials out there. If there's anything you miss, do let us know, and we'll be happy to dig out whatever kind of material we can get hold of. Good. I think that kind of pretty much wraps it up. Anybody, any more questions? Any more topics? Anything we should be talking about? If not, we'll wrap up with where to find sort of have a kind of a summary of where to find information. Denise, do you want to take over here?
Thanks, Hans. Absolutely. So I'm going to drop all these links into chat. So you should be able to find them there. But yep, as Hans said, anything that you'd like to find resource-wise, hopefully you'll be able to find this in this location. We have our spatial website on oracle.com, which we actually have listed here first. We have all of our live labs, our blogs, our Slack channel for A&D OUC, all of our YouTube videos. There's some really great ones up there that you should check out. The Ask Tom video series, LinkedIn, which is where we announce any of our upcoming Ask Tom sessions or any product launches. And then, of course, Hans's Twitter and Jean, and you can get to all of the summit presentation downloads at the last link at the bottom. So with that, Hans and Giant, thank you for such a great session. It sounds like it was an amazing conference. And hopefully we'll do this again in 2025.
Hopefully we
Yeah,
see some of y'all at this conference next year.
wouldn't that be great?
That would
Exactly.
be
So
great.
anybody who is here also in the audience, right? Maybe this got you thinking about whether you should attend next year. If you have anything to present, right? If you have maybe an interesting innovative project, or if you have sort of a technical aspect which you would like to highlight at the event, feel free to submit. There's always an interest in good and innovative content. That would be great. For that, you would get a conference pass for free. Otherwise, yes, it's still worth attending even if you don't present. As I said, for the purpose of networking, the learning experience alone, plus maybe also the interaction with us on the development or product management side. It would be great if we could see you at the event next year. And I think with that, we can wrap up. Okay, thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you.